There we go. All right, so we'll do three, two, one. Good enough. Then we'll just get like 5 seconds of room tone. All right.
Hey, we're live. Welcome back to Why We Roll, the tabletop game design podcast of the Stillfleet Studio. As ever, I'm Wythe Marschall, and I'm joined by.
Hey, what's up? I'm Chris Pickett. I have a cold. I sound weird tonight. Deal with it, I guess.
It's all
Thanks for being
good.
here.
I think, Chris, you might have caught some America flu because today is indeed the superb owl. So as we record this, superb owl will land at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, and a team themed around colonialism and a team themed around birds will fight each other in gladiatorial blood sports for billions of dollars and net ad profits later, and tie-ins with various fast food chains and apparel brands.
Hell
So
yeah. And also, we're now sponsored by Kalshi and Polymarket. No, I'm kidding.
yeah, DraftKings, you can place your
DraftKings.
parlay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
to celebrate that, we've had obviously we've brought on a fellow anti-capitalist, game creator. So we could talk about things that are not the superb owl. So thanks if you do spend the next hour with us. We really appreciate it. We know you have all the cool, fun pre-gaming activities you could be doing, but we are pre-gaming by thinking about games and society and politics and really having fun with your buds. So we're very excited to be joined by Laurie Blake. Laurie, thank you so much for making time. Laurie's here from Stop, Drop, and Roll Games, and we're going to hear all about that. But we're just talking before we got started that in addition to other games, we really reached out because of a game called Why We Fight. You may notice the similarity in title to Why We Roll. Why We Fight's taken it, another step, and we really are couldn't be happier to bring that discussion to you and talk about Solarpunk as a genre, direct action, and the strange era we find ourselves in, and again. And we're recording on February 8th, so if you're trying to keep up with all of the horrible things happening in the United States and elsewhere, that's the date. But we're really excited to talk about games and the role of games as kind of community building mechanisms and ways to have structured conversations and live through different kinds of experiences, even have sort of catharsis and have deep, maybe even debate. These are all questions that have come up on the show before, but Laurie, I really like that of all the guests we've had on, I think you're the first to sort of pitch that to us. So we just wanted to say thanks for, again, making time and bringing that energy. So Laurie, why don't you introduce yourself and let us know a little about your sort of background before we dig into ye old questions.
Sure, of course. And I'd also like to say thanks for having me on. I mean, you're saying that most of the time you're pitching this to other people, but if I'm the first to pitch it back to you, then that clearly shows me I've found the right people. This is, I'm in the right place.
100%.
So glad to see it.
Yeah.
So hey everybody, I'm Laurie Blake, and I am the lead director of Stop, Drop, and Roll. We mostly are known for Earth Rising, which is a game about transforming our world from its unsustainable present to a more sustainable future. And we now have just released Why We Fight, which is where you have not succeeded at that at all. It is not at all a sustainable future, but you are nonetheless, it's collapsed. It's all kind of in a sort of post-apocalyptic kind of world. And you are working together as the Community Alliance and also as crews of eco-punks looking to go out there and make the world different, make the world a better place. So that's what the game's all about. And it's been honestly amazing to release because more than anything, I think it's shown us that we're not the only ones that want to see a hopeful and brighter future out there. And more than anything, we're not the only ones that want to play games where that's what you're doing. Instead of ending the ones at the top of the pile, instead of being the lords of the Mad Max future, we're seeing more and more that folks really just want to be able to play games in a world where actually things can get better. So,
Yeah. Well, we're really excited to talk about that betterness and what that looks like in games and how to mechanicalize that. So maybe we can ask a little about your design process.
totally.
To kick us off, I mean, and Chris, please feel free to jump in. I feel like we usually start with, how did you get into games sort of broadly? I don't know, Chris, if you have anything that you were thinking of you want to add to that.
No. I mean, that's our traditional first question. Yeah, like how did you come into board games, TTRPGs, all of that stuff? Like, when did you get hooked into the hobby, and how has that kind of led to you becoming a designer in your own right?
Well, to be honest with you, I was hooked into board games like from the moment I could kind of move pieces along a board. Like my dad was a massive board gamer and war gamer and all kinds of all things nerdery really, which meant that like there are pictures of me sitting on his lap playing war games. Like he is there playing them and I'm just there on his lap and he's doing the thing. So it's always been around me. And so as a result, as I've grown up, I've sort of gotten more and more into it. And just over time, I think I was about maybe 12 when I first started doing my first RPG. And it's just been a lifelong passion, really. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a phenomenal way to be able to not just live out whole different worlds and fantasies and narratives, but also means to connect with other people. To get a group of friends around a table and to do things together and to put that time aside where you just spend time together having fun, and you don't need to worry about whatever else is going on in your life. At this moment, you are Grognar the Barbarian, or whoever the hell you are, and that's all that matters right then and there. And I love that for that. And I think, in a way, it's that ability to be able to fully invest in our in the fantasy worlds that we create together with people that has sort of led me to the point that I'm at, where I'm like, what if these fantasy worlds actually allow us to not just envision them as a thing that could be for these characters, but what if we can envisage them as a thing for ourselves? And so, yeah, that's sort of the premise in which we started really digging down into Why We Fight and made it the thing it is today.
Yeah, I love that. Can you say any influences, any games that you were playing coming into being a creator, or have you always been creating? Like, was there a moment when you moved from I play games to I am making games, or is it just smooth?
Honestly, it's one of those things where I've always had the urge to create. I remember when I was like really young, maybe 8 or so, I was making maps for Doom. I couldn't make maps for Doom, but I drew them on page. I loved playing Doom, the video game, so I would draw them on a page, the map layout and all the rest of it. Later on, it would be making custom scenarios for Warhammer Fantasy, what's it called, where it's basically Hero Quest, but the Warhammer version. That was the one I had. Anyway, it's custom scenarios for that. And then,
Is that Warhammer Quest? Is that?
Yeah, that's it. You got it. Warhammer Quest. Yeah, great. Loved it. That was the one I had as a kid. Anyway, so I've always been making. And so even when I was doing RPGs, just as playing them, not releasing them, not making them as a product, I was always homebrewing and like creating like, what if the rules did this actually? What if we took it in this direction? What if actually I know this sort of theme, but the rules don't match it. So how can we make it work? And I just find that fun. So it ends up being that like, I find it fun anyway. Let's do it for fun and also as a business, and it's been working out. So I can't say I could look back and go, this is when I started creating, because I've always had that drive. It's just been there.
Yeah, I mean, one question I guess that we often think about is like the relationship between GMing and designing, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on. Because you also mentioned a few different kinds of games there that are maybe not like Why We Fight. I'm just taking a wild guess. I've not actually played. I've read Warhammer Fantasy role playing. I've not played Quest, and I've read Why We Fight. Can you tell us a little about maybe that experience of maybe another way to frame it is like politics being something you're probably growing into at the same time you're growing into running games, hacking them, playing them. Was there, again, are there aha moments or moments you can look back on as influential with like, I want to do that, I don't want to do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Honestly, I think one of the major influential moments of so I'm gonna cast it back quite a way, which was back when I was I guess a teenager of some description. I can't remember exactly how old I was. I created a homebrew version in Fate for running what was effectively a Starship Troopers game, right? Okay, basically Helldivers before it was Helldivers. And effectively, I made this whole thing. You were members of a squad going out and doing various missions and all the rest of it. And that was probably the point at which, well, upon playing this with my friends, upon making these stories and realizing that even though I loved war games, even though I loved, like, as I say, Doom, even though I loved, like, play various types of Warhammer and all the rest of it, actually the stories that were interesting to me weren't the fighting and the violence and the victory over a mission or whatever. It was actually much more about the struggles that you face in amongst all of that. It was the emotions of the people who were trying to come out the other side of it. Those were the things that actually made the characters what they were. And this game, in that early stage, had none of that. And that was the point at which I realized this doesn't do it for me. They're just effective role play games, a war game. And you have this depersonalization of your soldiers as if it was that top-down strategy game. But that completely defeats the point of role playing. There is nothing left here for what I want out of a role-playing game. And I got rid of it. I tossed it aside. I was like, not interested. So when I came back many, many years later, and I found myself making something that was almost similar, it was like, okay, well, if we have this idea of going out on these missions and we're looking to actually achieve things and we're doing things differently, how do we make a game in which we actually drill down into those feelings and those emotions and the drive that makes us actually want to go and achieve those things, not just because some superior ordered us to, but because it's important to us. And that was a core driving factor of why we fight. And I think I probably wouldn't have been able to drill down into that quite as much as I did if I hadn't done it quite so horribly wrong originally so many years ago.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're always trying to sort of undo the things where you're like, I could have done that better. And obviously when you're going to publish, there's a different pressure than GMing for friends or home.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
A little bit. Chris, can you still hear me? Are we good?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I lost you for a second there, but I think we're good.
Sorry. So Chris, do you have questions before we get to? I want to get to why we fight. Just want to also ask, background and sort of open it up.
Yeah, well, I mean, my next question, as far as background goes, was, I'm just curious, Laurie, about the history of Stop, Drop, and Roll, how y'all kind of came together, how you started making games together, and just also shouting out the other folks that you're working with. But yeah, could you tell folks who don't know about your work about your company, about Stop, Drop, and Roll?
Sure, yeah. So we started back in 2019, and we were I met Rob through a friend of mine, and he was an artist who was sort of looking to get out of the corporate world. So he's our illustrator, Rob Ingle. And he was looking to get out of the corporate world. He was sick of sort of churning out art without any sort of soul to it, and wanted to do something more that he could really inspire him, stuff that he was engaged with and actually had a stake in. And meanwhile, I was doing freelance writing, and because I was an author at the time, and I was doing freelance writing, and I was struggling with the act of, I suppose you could say, writing for profit purely as a thing. It was difficult. It was very much the case of, like, you're having to do it kind of, it's on your own. You're not really engaging with anyone else. It's just, here's your brief to get the thing done, all the rest of it. So we were talking, we really wanted to make something different. And SDR was born because we both loved board games. We had a great time. We had these various ideas of various kinds. And we launched Pugs in Mugs, or got ready to launch Pugs in Mugs in March 2020. And then the pandemic hit the world and everything shut down. And we went, oh no, right. All of the big studios are pulling their games. Everyone's just kind of like going, well, we can't do this anymore. This isn't happening. What do we do? So we went, let's do it anyway. Let's just go for it. So we did, and we just pushed it out there, and it actually ended up doing really well. I think in part because all of the big studios pulled their games, and so as a result, everyone was just we were the only ones left there with a couple of other studios, and we did really well, and that was great. And we found our feet with our first game, and we released it, and we went on and we did Earth Rising, and that was great for it was taking a lot of boundaries that at the time people said we couldn't do, which was release a game about the climate crisis, especially during a time when everyone was saying, the media is still denying it's even a thing. You can't really, there's not the market for it, but we did, and it was a success, and we're very pleased with it. And to this day, it's been going into schools and universities and things like that. So that's been really, really cool. And then we moved on to Why We Fight, which was an RPG. So I suppose we've been kind of jumping around, doing all kinds of different stuff. But more than anything, I think we're finding that telling those stories that are about hopeful and exciting sort of possible futures is something that we're really passionate about. And so that's ending up kind of being a theme in our company, at least so far.
Well, that sounds really lovely, and I do think, for me, also part of the joy of making RPGs is the sports. So back to the Super Bowl day, the sports style, you're working with people, and unlike, because I'm not very competitive, sports with business, weirdly, although there's competition at the small scale of niche luxury goods with that are really meant to be, in our case, community engaging and so have some sort of other components. It doesn't really feel as competitive, so it does feel like you're getting to work with your friends and with others and meet new people, make new friends through this process, which is a huge reason to do it. So it's really cool that you've been able to form Stop, Drop, and Roll and kind of refine what you're up to. I think that does lead us into Why We Fight, which is how I first learned about Stop, Drop, and Roll. I think it caught my attention for a number of reasons. One is, so it's something we as a studio have made games that are explicitly political, although I think variously so, and I think to other people it's not always, totally clear what it means to claim something is or isn't political. Why We Fight is very direct, right? It's very obviously political. It talks about, I would say a leftist politics. I don't want to put words in your mouth. That's just how I read it from kind of the jump, right? From page one, from the marketing. And it seems to be about specifically direct action. It's also near future or sort of modern. It's tied to the now. So it's sort of easy to sort of draw parallels, but it doesn't seem to be tied to any one place. It does seem to be coming more from a kind of global north, maybe more urban perspective, but it clearly ties into broader stories of struggle. So it definitely caught my attention, and I thought, well, this is a game obviously I'm going to support, I'm going to back it, I want to read it. But then obviously I thought, we should have the team on the show and chat, because these are some of the themes we've talked about, not just Chris and myself, but some of our collaborators. How do you design RPGs that touch on these themes without coming off as strident or didactic? How do you make them actually fun? So I think there's a number of ways to go. And Chris, I'm curious what you think. One is very simple, which is just mechanically, kind of, can you break it down for us? What is the game? And how did you approach politics as a thing you do in a game, as opposed to goblin slaying or anything else, right? Any of the game loops we're familiar with. There's probably some deeper ones, but Chris, I'm curious kind of what you think as well before you hand it back to Laurie.
I mean, oh God, what was I going to say? Like I said at the top, I have a cold, so I'm a little bit slow tonight. No, I'm also curious about, designing around, play as praxis, going into that very, with a kind of straightforward approach, but then also, how you actually structure different play loops and how you do make that fun and engaging for people instead of just being purely didactic. How do you do that without the kind of power fantasy aspect of it? Very curious to hear you tell us about that.
Yeah, it's actually interesting you touch on the power fantasy side of it, because that's one of the things that we noticed the biggest kind of shift in with regards to Why We Fight, in particular with its kind of troop style play where you're playing a crew of 4 characters at the same time. And that's quite contrasted with the vast majority of RPGs where you play a singular character from a singular perspective. Right. So one of the things with that is that when you're playing from collective of different people, and you're able to build upon those people as you go, it becomes less about what can I do, what can I achieve, or what does this one person do, and what does this one person achieve. And so it becomes much more about cooperation and teamwork, just by the very nature of it being about multiple people within a crew. By the mere fact that you have to depend upon multiple characters because they each have different skills, it stops being a case of like, oh, well, I can do all of these things, so I will just lean into my strengths and I will do everything because I can, because I'm this powerful, amazing person. And it becomes more about, well, okay, this person is good at this thing. How did they come about that? Well, this person is good at this other thing. Okay, well, maybe they should take the lead on this particular task then. And that becomes much more a case of, as you play, you're almost feeling like you're thinking from the perspective of someone, I don't want to quite say managing, because that sounds almost kind of corporate, but more a case of like you're going and deciding sort of where people's strengths lie and who should be best placed to help things as they go. So as you learn more about them and you're able to draw more on their strengths, it also becomes more a case of going, well, this person's really passionate about this subject, so they can actually go even further than they otherwise would be. And this aligns with what they think about, what they care about. So as a result, we can draw upon both what they're good at, but also what they care about, and as a result, achieve something really special. And so it becomes so much less about power and becomes much more about like who we are, what's important to us, and the importance of our own motivations for what we necessarily may want to do and what we may want to achieve with that. Now, and we've got two books. We've got the direct action sort of short form, one-shot orientated game, but we've also got the core book. And the core book leans very heavily into this, where you're much more looking at building these crews at a time. You're looking at where they come from, and you're looking at what the place that they come from, the Community Alliance hub, what that's building into, what's that becoming, and the bastions that you discover along the way. Who is a part of these places? What are they looking to become? And so it's really interesting to me, coming from a long time of running and playing RPGs where everyone is playing a singular character, to being in a position where you're playing games where everyone's playing multiple characters, to see the intrinsic mindset shift of players in real time. That's been a fascinating one, even in development.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds really interesting. And just to back us up a little bit, so Why We Fight, it's solo plus narrative game. Can you explain? I mean, like as a solo game, you're playing multiple characters at the same time. Is it something where you can play it with like multiple people around the table and you just have like a bigger crew, or how would that work?
Yeah, of course. Like, I know that you guys know what it is, but I should probably give a quick overview about what Why We Fight actually is. So yeah, the game is we bill it as Solo Plus because basically it is designed for solo, but you can also play it with multiple other players as well, up to 5. And each player plays a group of 4 characters, and each of those start out as just like a name, a couple of descriptors, one specialty, the thing they're good at. And then one of those characters gains a personality discovery. And that's like, generally speaking, the first one is always why I fight. So it's the thing that pushed them to go out into the world and try to make a difference themselves. And then the other ones you'll discover along the way. As you travel, you'll learn about who these people are in response to the situations that they discover. And as you learn about other people, there may be other stuff. They don't all have to be why I fight, but they're all like intrinsic elements that are important to that person. It could just be like a hobby they love, or it could be someone back home they want to protect, or it could be someone that they that they had issues with in the past, that like a particular group that they have a problem with, or whatever else. Along the way, when things go wrong, you also reveal hardships. And these hardships are things that they continue to struggle with, things they're no longer able to mask in this moment. And so as a result, it's, it can be stuff from an injury of some kind that continually niggles at them, or it can be some kind of trauma or whatever else. But these things, as we build them onto the characters, they become more and more three-dimensional. They become more and more tailored towards what this person is like and what shaped them into the person they are now. And because you're able to build them in response to the game as you play it, it means that you always kind of have things to build upon. You're not sort of thinking about like, well, I've got this 3-page character sheet. Which bit of that shall I use? Instead, it's like, well, okay, we're in this, we're in this situation where we're trying to, liberate this storage of grain or something in order to be able to get it back to people. As a result, like perhaps the thing that's revealed about this character is something to do with food. Maybe there is something to do with that, either a lack of it or something that is important to it, or maybe they just really love cooking. In some way, this is something that is important to them, and it's important to them about the situation. So you've always got things to draw upon. And that was really important to us because when we first started designing the game, we were relatively new to GM-less games as a whole, and learning how best to create the prompts to sort of for people to build upon. We kind of had to learn how to create questions that you couldn't just answer yes or no to, So anything that any of the prompts that are part of the situations or a part of the character building elements or whatever else, they had to be things that you, by nature of answering them, you instinctively build upon. So it's all about kind of giving your own players the confidence to be able to run with their own narratives that they think of in response to what's provided in front of them.
Yeah, that's very cool. Can you tell us some of, in practice, how this went with playtesting, maybe, and how you've developed kind of thoughts around how to present a political game that would reach... I guess it's a question also of the intent of the audience. Like, do you imagine this has a broad audience, and have you sculpted the game in ways in the prompts so that you can engage kind of a large number of people, or are you kind of looking for people who they're already heads, they already get it, they're kind of in the inside,
yeah.
And how do you walk that tension? And I'm just curious from playtesting, as so much emerges, maybe, and again, Chris, feel free to jump in. Like when we playtest stuff, it changes sometimes how you think about, even if it's just a specific power NPC or kind of tension in the game, and you go back and kind of and rewrite it a bit. So I'm curious how, with a game that asks players to really go deep and think about their own political life, even if it's an imagined character, right? But it's pretty modern. It's gonna bring up some of those resonances. How that's played out so far.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, the first game kind of made it very clear how incredibly important the framing was, because the first time we playtested the game, it was a solo playtester. It was my partner, and it made her cry. So that was a bit of a shock, because obviously it wasn't necessarily meant to do that, but nonetheless it was one of those things where you start recognizing that the more you drill down into the emotional resonance of a game, the more careful you have to be about how you develop it and how you present it in a way that it is actually something that people will want to play again, as opposed to something that makes you go, wow, okay, that was incredibly depressing. So you need to make sure that whatever it is that you're building and the way that you build it, it is something that inspires people. It is something that makes them feel like they are empowered. And more than anything else, it has to make them feel like even at its darkest moments, they still have the possibility to turn it around. That is really, really important in the mechanics, and something that we had to work quite considerably hard on, because, especially when you're making a game that surrounds politics, the last thing you want is something to be hopeless. That is the opposite of what you need. It is the opposite of the message we're trying to get. And we needed to work really hard on making sure that that is always, always the case. Honestly, as we did playtests and ran games for folks, we found it really interesting how the more we, how best to put this? Basically, you needed to create a framework where folks were allowed to do as much as they want in a number of ways. Obviously, a GM-less game has to be relatively mechanicalized anyway, because you don't have a game master putting everything out for you. So with a GM-less game, the framework needs to be tight enough that people feel like they know what they're going to do next, or they know how to do what they want to do. But it also needs to be loose enough that they don't feel constrained on certain particular guardrails. They're just, I can only do option A, B, or C. So I guess I'll just pick one, I suppose. That's frustrating. That's annoying. So you need to make it feel open enough that you're like, yeah, I want to make that choice. I want to make those decisions, and I feel like I have the freedom to do that. But you also need to make sure that it's clear enough where the boundaries lie, so that you there's no ambiguity about it, because you don't have a game master to put people back on track. So with all that in mind, what was really fascinating was, by finding that balance, we discovered people coming up with scenarios and scenes and stuff that we did not at all have any expectation for. Things that we like answers to prompts and stuff that we like. When you design something, when you write a prompt or when you write a scenario or whatever, you have a strong idea about how people are going to respond to it, right? You're like, yeah, okay, this is the kind of story that's going to tell. You can't underestimate the power of the human imagination. They will go like people talk to GMs all the time, but like, oh, players, they take it off the rails all the time. I didn't expect it in a GM-less game. I did not expect it. There's all kinds of crazy stuff came out all the time, and it made it all the more important to find that balance. I mean, we found all kinds of stuff, like how in one particular playtest session, we had someone fill. In fact, we have one of the pictures in the book, actually, because we loved it so much. We found someone fill garden gnomes full of like petrol and start throwing them as Molotovs, because they were like, let's just combine these things. Let's just slam them together. And that's a thing we're doing now. And it's like, okay, wow, yeah, not expected, but nonetheless, really, really fun. And then on the other side of it, you've also got folks who are just like, yeah, we come across, some animals and like some peaceful civilians, and we're having to sort of like, there are some leading questions and such. And one of the players is just like, right, 8-trunked elephants with 8 trunks coming off their face. They're the products of genetic modification. They escaped, and now these people are hanging out with them. And they're like, okay, right. So they start building this narrative about why are these people hanging out with 8-trunked elephants, and they determine it's because 8-trunked elephants can always smell where water is, so they always lead these people to water. So as a result, they got abundant supplies of water because they're always traveling between all these various different water sources, and so as a result, that's how they kind of coexist with these creatures. And they keep building and we've got this incredible, like, effectively mobile bastion that is moving around in mutualist existence with these weird genetically modified elephants. And I'm sitting here as the facilitator being like, yeah, okay, I didn't expect that, but yeah, okay, why not? Let's go for it, buddy. Let's do it. You as a GM, I always feel like I'm able to be in control to some degree. When you create a GM-less game, I've never felt so out of control in my life.
Yeah, because you really do have to just sit back and be like, all right, well, you're going to take the prompts, you're going to take this wherever you take it, and you do have to kind of, as the designer, as a GM in a GM-less game, as a facilitator, there's an amount of agency that you have to be comfortable giving up. I wonder if one of your players recently read Paolo Bacigalupi or Bacigalupi, I can never pronounce this dude's name, The Wind-Up Girl, which is also near future post-climate apocalypse genetically engineered elephants that they use for manual labor.
Wow, I didn't know about that, but yeah, maybe it turns out
that book is not very hopeful, which I feel like is quite different than Why We Fight. And I was curious, could you supply us, like, what does one of the prompts kind of look like or sound like when you're setting up a scenario? Because I am so curious, like, how do you have those guardrails where you're making sure that there is like an edge of hopefulness to it, but also like setting up, just like you kind of got to get into the shit, right? Like, you even have a faction, even just on your website, like the White Fist, which is a hedge fund backed fascist militia. So like there's got to be quite a bit of darkness. So yeah, what does a prompt look like? How do you balance that darkness with play?
Sure. Okay. I mean, if you give me 1 second, I will. I will get the book. So,
nice.
So prompts in this are pretty straightforward. So you have the title of the situation that you've discovered. You've got a bit of setting description, which sort of starts you out with the understanding of what you're looking at, and then you have two specific questions. So let's take, for example, to explain, you typically at the beginning of discovering a new place or traveling to a new area, you roll 2d6, and this creates a d6 table. So one of them is the tens and the other one is the units. And so as a result, that means that you've discovered prompt 24. So yeah, so in this case, prompt 24, so we've got nature's bounty, which is this area has grown wild and you find yourself surrounded by a grove of something useful and precious. What has flourished in this place? How could it be beneficial? What clues point to something else coming here? Now, you immediately have a few things that the players themselves build upon. So they're like, right, okay, so something here is useful and precious. What is that thing? So somebody in the group will say, okay, maybe it is, it's a really, really big like collection of gooseberries, maybe, right? Okay, so that's fine. We're going to go with that. How could it be beneficial? And they're like, okay, well, that's nice and simple. It's a food source, right? And hell, you can make gooseberry wine. That's some good stuff. So we've already got some beneficial elements to this, right? Okay, that's great. Perhaps there's medicinal qualities to it, something along those lines. What clues point to something else coming here? Now, this is where you might start building into the situation builder. So the next step, once you've determined your discovery, you then choose from the table and roll from the other, and you determine two other groups that are present. So you might have wild herbivorous animals, you might have the White Fist, you might have armed and desperate, the peaceful civilians, wild carnivore animals, or nobody. And so as a result, you've got two potential options, and what those end up being could well inform you about what evidence is left in this place. And then finally, what conflict do you notice? So you've got a feud over a misunderstanding, a fight arising from distrust or past misdeeds, conflict of beliefs or values, an oppressive confrontation of one group over another, a clash over resources or needs, or an unlikely peaceful coexistence. So all of these things create a clash of some description, or in one case, a non-clash, which means that you already know that something is going on between the other groups. You then determine a personality discovery for one of your characters. Each person does for one of their characters. So knowing what you've got in front of you, you determine something that's important to one of your people. And then finally, you decide what you're going to do about what you've discovered. Now, that has led to, that prompt has come up a few times before, and well, all of them have come a few times, but nonetheless, what that has come up to be has been like, maybe there are bears that are foraging in this place and don't take too kindly to people trying to scavenge their gooseberries. Otherwise, maybe there are, maybe it is in fact the White Fists are growing this place. This is a plantation, and when you start going in there and you go a little deeper into this big wide thing, you find that there are in fact people being enslaved, being forced to pick these berries or whatever else. As you build upon the scene, you add more detail to it. And as you add more detail to it, you yourself determine how the scene becomes what you are interested in. So what that means is that whilst you never necessarily know what you're walking into, you always know it's going to be something that resonates with you because it's something that you're coming up with. So by creating questions that ask things that can't be answered yes or no to, it kind of forces the player to immediately start thinking outside of the normal GM and player hierarchy, where you have like, oh, GM, what is it I see around the place? You tell me, buddy, you've got a prompt, like that's how this is working now. So it's like ultimately we wanted to kind of create something that builds people up into the I guess into the freedom of being able to create their own narrative without it feeling like they're being dropped in the deep end, without it feeling like the game is just sort of going, hey, there's some stuff here. What does it mean? What's happening? Instead of that, we wanted to have it be a gradiated thing. And that means that the reason why there's also the personality discovery at the end of each one, before you decide what you're doing, is because that also means that you create an emotional frame of reference from at least one of your characters to the scene that is going on. And that means that you immediately have some idea about what you might want to do about it, because you can see it from the perspective of the character in front of you. So each of these stages is a facilitator for the next one in a lot of ways. And one of the great things that we've seen about that is by the time they get to the end of the situation builder, people are excited about doing something about it. And that's been really cool to see. Because ultimately, Why We Fight is first and foremost all about empowerment and agency and feeling like you're the one that can do something about this. Whether it's fighting fash or whether it's making life better for people you find along the way or making space for nature and animals, ultimately, whilst there are prompts, the story is created by the group. And the scenarios are majoritively created by the group. And that means that we've never, ever come across something that has been the same as the previous one, which has been really, really cool.
Yeah, I love that. We're playing around more with for Stillfleet 2, we had rules from the beginning about multiple GMs. We haven't done too much with solo until recently, more because of Danse Macabre, people asking us to do solo rules, but especially shouting out Vex in the chat, like Vex and Ryan O'Connor and I have been talking about, with this kind of menu or sort of everyone is playing some aspect of planning out the story together and then playing through it. And there's different ways you can hand off those responsibilities and different cadences, right? Different rhythms you can create. So it's cool to hear you describe how this works for Why We Fight and plays into, as you're saying, the idea of everyone being empowered and agential. Can you talk us through some of the, I guess, like the actual ideas of direct action in the game, and maybe if you're open to it, how that ties into real life, or how you've made, to the degree you've gone back and forth. Like you brought up the idea of making, someone having an emotional reaction to it, but can we get more specific about when we're talking about, why we fight and what we're fighting? We're talking about fighting fascism, right? To a large degree. And what we mean by direct action. Maybe you can even say sort of how you are thinking about direct action and how you're modeling it in the game. Because I do think it's a little different than modeling the traditional, again, goblin orc slaying, which sort of assumes that you are weirdly in a zone of exclusion where you're allowed to do whatever you want. Because if I think about New York City or Philadelphia or London or wherever, if I walked around with a sword and just slew things, like slaying is generally frowned upon. And so I think it already is sort of weird that the OSR tradition sort of assumes you live in a zone that is lawless. And I think to just bring games into a zone that is legalized is actually a kind of powerful move that makes them feel, to me, more narratively interesting immediately. There's real stakes. Because I live in a world where, like, I need money. I can't just slay people for money. That's like not a thing. On LinkedIn, it's not a job type.
I mean, you could, but
I guess, yeah. So I think it's interesting to kind of plan around that, and then that, that sounds far maybe and goofy thinking about direct action and changing political regimes, and whole systems. But I mean, I think they're related, and that how do we start to model that? Well, you need to model a world where we actually want a society where you can't just do whatever you want. Like that whole thing about freedom and to be ultimately free in a libertarian sense is actually horrible. Like if we lived in the Conan the Barbarian verse, I don't think most people would be very happy with the slaying. You know what I mean? We actually want some sort of social contract, and there's different ways. I prefer a more socialist model. Other people's might have other ideas, but how did you bring that into game design?
Obviously, that's a big question. I mean, look, the baseline of it is the fact that you, by playing as a group that is going out into the wilderness and taking and being able to deal with things as they see fit, ultimately you have the capacity to be able to, I suppose, not be. Here's the thing: you go out into New York City and you start actually killing people, as some fascists have started finding. There are consequences. And if you are in a situation where those consequences are not like, how to put it, if those consequences are politically enforced in the sense that the right people can go and do it and the wrong people are not allowed to go and do it, then immediately you start to have a very problematic situation where ultimately you have laws for one and not laws for the other. Now, the setting in Why We Fight is suggesting that the world order as we know it, and this is kind of why it's set in the Northern Hemisphere, because ultimately the Northern Hemisphere is it's the holders of the keys of capitalism, right? Ultimately, if the Northern Hemisphere collapses, capitalism as we know it, the global hegemony of capitalism collapses. And so if this is the situation in which Why We Fight exists in, then we also are going to be calling into question the basic rule of law as we see it, as we know it. The idea that states have monopoly over violence, the idea that people are not able to build on certain places or do certain specific things. And this also can be taken in both directions. You have folks in the game, the armed and desperate, who are just doing what they need to survive, but they can choose violence to get those things. So you know what? When the opportunity arises, they'll take it. Is it moralistically, from a civilization of that we live in standpoint, acceptable? No. Is it acceptable from the position that these people need to eat and they'll take that food to feed their families? It's debatable. Those debates happen around the table because those are the sorts of folks you come across. And unlike games or narrative settings like Mad Max or similar, where you have folks basically just slaughtering anybody they can possibly come across to take what they possibly have, we're not quite there yet. We have a world which can grow its own food. We have a place where there are at least enough resources in which we can scavenge what we need and be able to build with it. The world is, to some degree, still functional. It's just civilization that isn't. So rebuilding that, it starts to ask those questions of what does that look like? What is or isn't acceptable? When is or isn't it acceptable to stand up with violence to injustice? What points at what points do you feel it's reasonable to say, for example, actually kill fascists, versus when is it not acceptable to do those things based on what they're already doing? If they're not doing anything, is it better just to kind of scare them off and let them go? If they are, is it based on what they're doing? These are the situations that it sets it in. And one of the slight benefits of it being a GM-less game is that, in a way, you're setting your own tone. You're determining your own guardrails. You already know, to some degree, what you are or aren't comfortable with doing. Why We Fight gives you the tools with which to explore that, but it doesn't tell you what you should or shouldn't do with that. However, because it is so very firmly rooted in the idea that you are looking, these characters that are from the Community Alliance, they are looking actively to make a better world, a moralistic world, a world where people don't go without. You automatically set it up where you are not looking to go around slaughtering everyone. You are not, this is not the game we're playing here. You can, if you want to go be murder hobos, there are so many games you can go and be murder hobos in. This is not that game. And it makes that very clear throughout. And it gives you plenty of methods and opportunities with which you can deal with people or situations or animals or whatever in ways that are fully non-lethal, in ways that are completely alternate to the idea of just going around and enacting Wild West rule. So it's very much a case of, when we talk about direct action, ultimately it kind of comes back to that old quote, and I'm desperately struggling to think of I'm terrible with names, unfortunately, but there is a quote I love, which is that any collection of people who get together and unanimously decide that they're going to do a thing is an act of direct action. Ultimately, direct action is as simple as people deciding they're going to do something and doing it. So when that comes to a game like Why We Fight, it's all about setting up situations in which they go, well, okay, what do we want to do? And how are we going to do it? Because the moment you start thinking about that, even just from a game perspective, it kind of sets you up even in real life to be able to start thinking about that too. What is acceptable? What isn't acceptable? Or what line do I personally feel moralistically is okay to draw? No GM is forcing me. No GM is deciding, well, if you don't do something, they're going to all be killed. Because ultimately, you're the one creating the storyline, and that doesn't, obviously, no one's going to have a good time if it's just like, and then everything was fine. because that's not how things work. But what does, and that's why there's that setup with like what conflict is going on, what conflict is happening between these groups, because that allows you to explore when these are the stakes, when these are the things that people want, how do you navigate that? How do you deal with it? What are, more than anything, what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to leave and say, it's not my problem, man, I'm on my way to something specific. This is something I've just happened to be there with. Probably not. 9 times out of 10, people are more interested in actually doing something and making things right, even if it's just mediating between groups, even if it's just standing between them and going, hey, look, we can make this balanced, we can make this okay. And sometimes it still ends up going wrong. Sometimes it goes terribly wrong and it ends up in a combat. But nonetheless, it is all about what you choose to do. And ultimately, that's the crux of direct action. When law isn't, law isn't based on morality. I'll be honest with you, law is not moral. And as we see in many countries, that those who have committed wrongdoing don't see any justice, especially if they have money. We see more and more that it is not that justice is moral. It is not that law is moral. And so as a result, it becomes a question of, well, if that's the case and it's not about law, why do we do the things we do? Why are we willing to stand up? What is it that we're standing up for? And what are we going to do about it? Where do we make that stand? And so that's the sort of thing that Why We Fight is designed to sort of make people start thinking about. Because honestly, I'm seeing more and more, and obviously this was not something that was happening when we were designing the game because we've released it now, but we're seeing more and more that people are having to make those choices. And I think anything that makes them start thinking about that means that when they do have to make those choices, it's an easier choice to make.
Yeah, well said. And something you were
beautifully
saying, and it came up in the chat, was that sometimes these games, by clarifying the rules down, boiling them down for rule purpose, for what's the term, aleatory or whatever, for game design purposes, you're simplifying something that in real life is very complex, but we all pretend, oh, it's very simple. As I said in that example, you can't go around New York slaying people with a sword, but actually, to your point, you kind of can. Depends who you are, and depends who you're slaying and what you're, and I think Vex in the chat brought up slaughterhouses. We're also talking about prisons and sort of, again, spaces. There's sort of steps of exclusion. It's not black and white. There's this whole complicated framework of, judicial and extrajudicial killings. If we think about, everything from lethal injection to anti-terrorism actions, all in quotation marks for podcast listeners. And so I think, the game setting highlights that actually we live in a kind of meta, a setting with rules, but the rules, to your point, are not moral. They're contoured very differently depending on your build, what you roll randomly on your life path generator here. And because of that, I think the game allows us to sort of talk about those conflicts in a way that is clarifying, is probably faster, and maybe also there are guardrails because it is a simulation, it's not real. So it allows us to have some of those conversations. I will say, to your point about direct action, what is direct action? Is organizing direct action. I mean, it sounds, I think it is. But to sort of steelman that, I agree. But I also think you could say, isn't there space to have a more robust conversation around what we, as you said, when do we fight back, and sort of what are those lines? And I do like that you're giving players agency in the game to decide that for themselves. I think that's something we've also run into as creators, where you don't want to come up with games that are too didactic or prescriptive, where there's a heat index, and when the heat gets to a certain point, it's just the kind of Grand Theft Auto thing of like, everyone is shooting at you, you're shooting at everyone, in part because I think it's really unsatisfying. Where do you go from there? It's like hard to tell a story when it's just chaos, and at that point you just play Warhammer, play a video game. But I also think it takes away the agency. So I think it's interesting to talk about that moment, that tilt of players going from we're going to organize or mediate to no, we're going to go steal something from the fascists, or we're going to go fight or even kill the fascists. Because I think we're at a point where that is becoming more and more the reality for many Americans. They have to decide how much do I put up with before I do literally anything that is outside the playbook of liberal call my elected representative, right?
Right.
Last episode was called "Nonviolence is Violence Too." Somebody's got to die, right? So just I think that this is like, hey guys, Americans, like, it's gonna be us or them. Like, what do you want? So sorry, Chris, you may have more of a question here. I'm just responding to themes that have come up. Yeah.
No, I don't have more of a question. I mean, I was thinking the same exact thing where, I think you're right. We're coming to a point, especially in this country, with the kind of like visibility of fascism. And we've talked about it's been around for a long time, but we're seeing it more and more now, and it's affecting kind of like a wider pool of people. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
there is
God
that ultimate
forbid, it's
question.
affecting white people now.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. But it is a question of like, yeah, what is your actual breaking point, and like thinking about what direction action is or can be. I mean, I liked what you were saying, Laurie, where it's kind of about the trying. It's about putting yourself out there and just doing kind of anything really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so it was a big thing a little while ago, but a lot of folks, an entire organization of people was made illegal here after a direct action event. Now, I'm literally not allowed to say whether or not I agree with them or not, because I would be arrestable if I said something along those lines. But more than anything, I think it's a case of the fact that when nobody was harmed and nobody was in any way impacted except for the military-industrial complex was in some way, we could almost just say delayed, because it was paint. Red paint was put on a plane, and therefore the military-industrial complex was delayed. And for that reason, people went to prison, and an entire group of people, and even the act of giving agreement with this organization is enough to put you in prison. And that is extreme. Ultimately, it is just the act of saying, I don't want these bombs to be dropped. I don't want these people to die because of actions my country are taking. And those people end up in prison. That is extreme. And so the question about whether or not direct action is important is always has to be backed up with the question of, well, there are definitely consequences. Whether or not there are justifiable consequences, whether or not they're acceptable consequences, there will always be consequences for the actions that we take. And that and obviously it's a difficult one to be able to portray in a game, and I won't deny that we did make the choice to make it that it was in a post-collapse society that the game inhabited, because it does give more freedom to be able to act than a current day one. But nonetheless, I think ultimately those consequences only outweigh the present threat for so long. And the problem more than anything is that the higher that threat goes, the more people are going to be willing to take those consequences in order to make it stop. How far is that going to be pushed? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. And I think that's what scares people the most. It's not even necessarily that the thing is happening that is scaring people. It's the fact that it could still go further. It's the fact that at what point do you actually go, enough is enough, I can't take this anymore. I need to do something, even if it's not allowed, even if it's going to mean consequences, because this is beyond what I can tolerate. And honestly, it's a scary place to be in. And I think that by having a safe space, by having a place in games to be able to start exploring those questions, by having somewhere that you can have around with your friends, with people you trust and that you have a connection with, that you can start like actually talking about these subjects with, and even acting out the ability to be empowered in a way that you otherwise don't currently feel like you could be, I think is a really important thing. And I'm really glad to see more games actually looking at it from that perspective. And, I obviously we released it with that idea, but I'm glad to see there are others too. It's one of those terrible things where at the moment we've released and it's like, I wish I wasn't such a poignant game, like, I wish it wasn't so of its time. But I guess at the end of the day, we make art surrounding what we see, right? I mean, the most the majority of great artists, especially writers and such like that, have made things that are based on the struggles that they face in reality. You look at Animal Farm and it's all about the communism and all of that, because that was a really big thing that was going on at that time. you look at the many female great authors that have written about the struggle for women's rights and the impacts that it has upon them by not having those rights. You know, at the end of the day, it was an outlet for me to be able to make this game, but I hope that it also becomes an outlet for people to play it.
Well, I mean, I think it's hard to get at some of these themes better than you are. Just to say, you know, I don't know if it screws you up if we say we agree. In theory, ask a question: can we say we agree with the group that to not to be named in Britain because of laws that were unjustly passed? But in any event, that could be asked.
I mean,
one could ask the question.
One could ask the question. Yeah, the important thing really is that, you know, these are examples of how our states decide where the lines are for us, and those lines aren't necessarily things that we agree with. And I think having games that allow players and prompt players, in fact, to decide their own lines, I think is something that's very important, because it allows them to start thinking outside of the box they were born into. Because, you know, we're born into a culture and we're surrounded by that culture, and it's our standard, it's our norm. And then to think outside of that, it makes you realize not only what the good things, well, not only what the bad things are, but also what the good things are. Some of the things that culture does right, and things that you want to preserve. You know, we talk about the fascist elements that we want to fight against, but honestly, one of the major inspiring things was actually during the pandemic, when, even though there weren't any sort of monetary incentives for doing so, even though there weren't any companies that were hiring people to do it or whatever else, people would help their neighbors. People would get medicine to people who needed it. People would volunteer to bring food to people who needed it. They made sure that their neighbors stayed okay, that people didn't go without. They banded together in the face of a crisis and made something better than what was actually better than their state did. Let's be honest. And that was incredibly inspiring for me. That yeah. You know, ultimately, I think that showed me that the problem is not people. People are good. People want to help the people around them. The people that they care about, they want to make their lives better. And that, I think, was a major inspiration for Why We Fight as a whole, because I think, given the opportunity, even though the media tells us otherwise, given the opportunity, I think people will always choose their communities and their own safety and sanctity in terms of providing for everyone around them, over being able to be the last one at the top of the pile. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you know, the kinds of emergent, you know, organizing and organization formation and real ties to material resources, like my brother in the chat talking about, you know, insulin, right, being something that, like, in the United States at least, is very expensive, even though it costs pennies to make. So it's very scarce. Weirdly, it's something that we could make an infinite amount of for basically nothing. But it's a valuable, you know, substance that is traded, and it's a commodity that's protected, and it would be against the law to, you know, do certain things. So, you know, people like, just like with food, you know, access to healthcare can be kind of a community effort, and we saw this with COVID. Different groups trying to make sure that you know, elders were taken care of, et cetera. Yeah. So I do think that's a good example of the kind of modeling a new world where you can imagine it, you can do it on paper, but then in reality, there are more and more emergencies where we just have to respond. We have to try different things. So I do think it's a cool idea to bring that into games and show people that maybe a little more directly than some other games where, yes, you can tell inspiring stories using 5e or whatever system you want, but I don't think the system or the game books, they're not really doing a lot of that work for you. So in terms of the traditional contract between author and reader, it's like they're only doing 1 or 2% real life inspiration, you know, and you'd have to do 98% of figuring out how to hack the system to tell those stories. Your games, right, and I'd like to think our games in different ways are doing more of that, and they're getting closer to sort of a handshake where we're setting you up in narrative structures to explore agency and what are the lines you wouldn't cross, how would you help people emergently, what organizations do you form. I will just say I think it's also worth considering, even in the global north, where a lot of this apparatus is decayed, that there are existing kind of left formations, and there's all around the world, right? There's people who've been doing this work for a long time and thinking outside of the nation state as such, and it's particularly imperialist nation states. And so I think it's interesting also to bring that into games in different ways. And I just also want to highlight that a lot of what you're saying around just people being able to come together with each other in games lets you have these conversations at all in a way that is increasingly mediated by technology, and you're just not encouraged to have third spaces, right? You're encouraged to go spend money at whatever, the bar, or whatever it is. So having physical games gives you a chance to just talk with people in a real way about again, real life things, their food security, their health, in addition to, hey, should we have a mesh network, should we have a community fridge, should we go to this protest, whatever actions that you can imagine up from there, right, that you could have in real life conversations about. So I want to be mindful of time. It's over an hour. I do think there's so much more we could talk about. I want to make sure that Laurie, we give you a chance if there's anything you want to bring up, especially what you're up to next, because Why We Fight, I'm sure, is not the only game I'm guessing you have in you. But also, Chris, if you had other questions before we kind of move to wrap it up.
No, my audio's been cutting in and out, so I apologize. But no, yeah, leave it up to Laurie for this one.
Cool. Yeah, Laurie, why don't you tell us about the future before we let you go?
Sure. I mean, I'll be honest with you, we're not 100% set yet on what our next kind of big release will be necessarily, but I have been working. So when we released Why We Fight, or when we did the crowdfunder for it, rather, we had a partner project called Assemblage, which you should definitely check out. It's also another GM-less game. It's all about sort of, you are a weird ecology that, and you build up a kind of ecosystem, and then a disaster strikes that ecosystem, and you have to decide amongst yourselves how it survives. And it's a fascinating game. I played it, and it was brilliant. So we ended up going for quite an ambitious kind of partner project, because that was, you're meant to sort of, as partners, release something small for folks who back both. And we decided, hey, why don't we try just like putting together a kind of mesh of the systems? All right, so we'll take Why We Fight, and we'll take Assemblage, and we'll just kind of put like a little one-shot adventure where we smash them together. And then we looked at it closer, and there was more and more things that kind of mesh really, really well and in really interesting ways. And we ended up kind of coming together, me and the designer, Nat Mesnard, who is just amazing. I love working with. And we've created something. It's going to be a game called Natural Selection. And it's basically about where you have a crew from the Community Alliance that are going over to this as yet undiscovered island. There has been no sort of ability to be able to get to it up until this point. And you, kind of Galapagos-like in a way. And then you sort of land there, and you're looking to study the local flora and fauna and discover sort of things about the island and its ecology and everything else. But you have to not only survive on it, but also the ecology is really interested in you. So you have two teams. You have one that plays the assemblage, and you have another team that plays the expedition. And you're both looking to kind of get sort of asymmetric goals that are kind of overlapping each other. So as the assemblage attempts to discover more interesting things about these brand new food sources and water sources and strange buzzing sounds that come from your base camp, gradually they may well start, destroying or dismantling or in some way infecting the structure of it. And the expedition's aim is to try and discover as much about the island as they can, in the hopes that they can do that and get home before they're inevitably stuck there forever and become a permanent part of the ecosystem in a brand new way. It's been fascinating to make. It's been amazing to playtest, and I'm so excited to get it out to people. Obviously, it's going to be free to the folks who back both games, but we are also going to be making it for sale once it's completed. I'm really, really excited, because it's kind of, obviously we called Why We Fight GM-less, and GM-less games are a thing. This is almost GM full. Like, it's both sides are kind of like actively working in creating more and more about this place and the things they build and the things they discover. And it's that kind of like almost passing to each other of prompts in which to build from. And it's a fascinating game. I've been really enjoying making it, and I just cannot wait to get it out for people. So yeah, look out for Natural Selection. That's probably what we're going to release next.
Nice.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's been really fun.
I love that.
Well, we can always have you back on, and happy to promote stuff. So just please, shout us out, and we'll try to get the word out as that becomes available. Chris, last questions for Laurie?
Yeah. Our famous last questions. Laurie, where can folks find you online? Where can we find Stop, Drop, and Roll's incredible products, and how can we best support you going forward on the internet?
Okay, well, you can find our products at sdrgames.studio. We have all our various games there, and a whole bunch of information and blog posts and all kinds of stuff as well, if you're interested in that kind of thing. In terms of social media, you can find us on Blue Sky and on Instagram. We're also on Discord, where we have a little community of folks who, some of them join in with playtests and things of the stuff that's coming up. Others are just excellent cheerleaders. And some folks sort of share their stories of the games that they've played and how they've gone and all kinds of stuff. So it's a great little community, very Solarpunk orientated, and yeah, we're very welcome to join it. Otherwise, though, yeah, we often go to conventions in the UK, and so if you are a UK listener, then do come and see us at the UK Games Expo or Dragon Meet or any one of them. So I think we'll also be at Tabletop Scotland this year because we have just moved to Scotland. So that's also nice. So yeah, that's pretty much how to find SDR. Always great to meet with new people. So, feel free to drop us an email if you have questions as well. So we are hello@sdr.studio. So
Beautiful.
Nice.
Yeah, people can meet you up in Scotland, get a funcy piece. What are other Doric things I know? I don't remember. The funcy piece is the only one I can really remember. It's a little piece of cake, little cake.
That's it. Yeah, we'll share some tablet. That'll be a good time.
Yeah, tablet. Delicious.
Well, thanks for taking time out of your day to talk with us, and please let us know in the future as you develop new games, and of course stay in touch on our Discord, on yours, and on the socials. And everyone else out there, please stay safe and use these emergent networks, Discord, meeting up with your buds, going to cons is a big one, to maybe talk about some of these themes and think about a plan for non-game related activities that might have to take place for whatever reason. In the meantime, who knows why?
Who knows?
We'll have another one of these where you have to get some sort of VPN password or something in order to watch it. I don't know. Maybe Vex or Zach can help us set that up. In the meantime,
I'll grow a mustache out just for the thing.
You gotta grow a mustache.
Make myself really. Yeah,
actually, I think we'll all just wear what's it called, Guy Fawkes masks, so no one can technically prove. In the meantime, stay safe and enjoy the Superb Owl, whichever team of brutal people you're rooting for. Chris, thank you as always. And Laurie Blake from Stop, Drop, and Roll, thank you so much for coming on to talk about Why We Fight and other games you're working on, past, present, future. Thanks to everybody in the chat. And we will see you later on Why We Roll. That's it.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.